The other way, where you say this guy does a thing, this character does that thing, that could either be just developing the situation further along, or if it is something that might otherwise require a role or some formal outcome, that it turns into outcome authority. And those are two pretty different things. So, but anyway, the point is that you have a very broad spectrum of how you want these points to apply. Some backstory, some situation, even some outcome, depending on, that NPC. So the point being is that it's a wide spectrum, a wide range of things those points can do. So I think it might be useful not to say, is it right for it to do this? Is it right for it to do that? But more like, what is it in your mind shouldn't be done with it? You've already got that one veto about having your own character managed. But what else? What are things? And you said no contradictions, right? We're not going to flip anything. I mean, we have to work with what's known, is the way I usually say.
Okay. Yeah.
So, are there other considerations? And also, let's especially look at that backstory stuff, like that guy is related to that guy, or that guy is related to me, or something like that. What aspects of the backstory are not acceptable for doing this? Could it be that maybe the first player you talked about is right, and that you don't go walking into other people's backstories?
It's a hard it's such a hard line for me, and that's part of the work. And so let me explain one other aspect of the game
Yeah,
because
sure.
this is very relevant. Okay,
Yeah.
so now in the game there's two phases, and the first phase is where the GM sets the scene.
Right.
They have total ability to set the scene, say what the situation is, and you get rewarded for playing through it. And if there's some reason where you would say, my character's not going to be here, I don't want to do this, then you don't get the reward or whatever, but you don't have to be in it. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So,
So if it makes sense, sometimes you don't get a choice because you got to sleep, and if someone attacks you in the night, then you're in the scene. But that's part one. Part two is when the players they have their experience points,
right. I remember
and
these
they
karma
get
points. Yeah.
right, yeah, and they establish the scene. So we take turns, and the player can describe. So if in the Doom scene a princess is kidnapped out from underneath the players say, "Okay, I want to get her back. I'm going to spend a point," and they get to act as the GM and
Right.
establish
They
what's
say the
going on.
they pulled, the people pulled the wagon off the road into a secluded area, but we know all about it. We're sneaking up. We're sneaking up on them.
Exactly.
Right.
So this because they asked, the players like, "Well, what can we do? What can we establish?" And I kind of try to play by the same rules. And what can happen sometimes is people will establish these scenes, will create the scenes that also mess with people's backstory
Right.
or whatever. Like, oh, you start a scene where this person is doing something that the other person might not want them to do, or it's just happened, right? And then you're reacting to that scene.
Right. Well, you see, that's an interesting point. There is the potential here, of course, for griefing and other aspects of like, what is the word I want? Pain in the ass play. But that's no different from the GM doing it. Okay. Right. So it's not. I don't want to get into the idea. Well, if you give this particular sort of authority to players, well, players are a wretched, miserable lot, and they will, they won't know
Right.
what to do with it. They'll misuse it. I can't give it to them. So instead of that, let's look at it from when this is legit. What is legit? Let's go to the GM. What is legitimate for the GM to do in framing up a scene? There will be standards for this. I mean, how severe can you be? Can you start with them chained to a wall? Or would the player say, excuse me, if you're going to chain that character to the wall, you better roll some dice first? Um, or for example, what if you say, by the way, um, did you know that your character is actually, you know, a demon hybrid? Because I say so. I'm framing the scene. You see what I mean? There are limits to where the GM can legitimately frame the scene. There are certain uh, there are certain things which are reserved for events in play, and certain things where the information would change too much. Just like you said, the known would change too much. Some revelations are fine, but they should be revelations in blank spaces, not in known spaces. So
Right.
if you have standards for what you consider to be uh, scene framing, situational framing, because scenes are just a unit in the situation. Um,
Right.
if you if you have limits for your situational framing as you move through play, in terms of what you don't actually get to change from last time. There are things that changing from last time, everyone knows, are reserved for the functionality within a scene, and nothing else can do it. You can't say, okay, we're going to start with your mind taken over by this or that witch, and you're like, wait a minute. Again, you know, you can try, but no, you're not. We are that little scene skip you just did. You can't put whole scenes of play in there and tell me what happened. So I'm not, when I say you can't, maybe in some game we could, but I'm saying maybe from the point of view of certain players, probably myself included, I would object over you know, uh, too many events, consequential events folded into that gap. So, whatever it is your standards are for that, that's what you should reflect on and say that's the standard we all adhere to. I have
I
standards when
think
I do it. These are my standards. You guys should do the same. And we should all know that. That way you won't live in fear. I mean, do you fear me when I frame a scene? No, because I am the GM, right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
don't fear your fellow players, but they have to know what my rules for this are. Because you're using rules for it. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. You are using rules for what authorities and what pieces of them you're not stepping on.
Right. And you mentioned last time about how, the things you do the best are the ones that you're not thinking of. And it's very true. Because I noticed there's definitely a level of trust because like I feel like I can do a lot. Like I've put people in chains before.
Mm-hmm.
I've done this and done that. And because they trust that it's going to be fun and getting out of it and how they got there and how,
Right.
explain. But when another player wants to do something, that's when the trust level drops,
Right.
you know.
Well,
And
this. Mhm.
establishing those standards is important. I got to think about how to do that.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that we don't have to say that the standards for the players have to be different. We simply have to recognize that you don't have to live in fear. And also, I mean, remember, when people are given something like this and they don't know the boundaries, they may well, right? They may. I mean, who knows? I'm not either of these people. Let's pretend that the person who said the guy from your ex mercenary band, that guy is, okay, or whatever it is he said about it, right? Perhaps that player was actually, quite happy with this. Hey, let's get some more of this ex mercenary stuff in here, and let's have it be nuanced, right? Let's have some other opinions. I mean, I'll make up this NPC and I'll throw it over to Jeff. So when we play, we'll see what Jeff does with this idea. It's a good idea. And yet the other person was kind of like, yeah, well, if you can do that, what might you do next? What might you do? I mean, he doesn't know where that even if the other guy was staying within certain boundaries, it might not have sounded like it. I mean, he put his foot on the wrong island, right? I mean, this guy's like, nobody gets on my island. I mean, not without going through my little vetting process first. Anything you say and do here has to meet my approval. Um, and so I think that trust is only built by saying how you want it done and then other people actually demonstrating that they understand that. Or If they overstep it and someone says, "Excuse me, that wasn't actually in the agreement for what you said you would do with those things," they say, "Oh yeah, you're right. I got a little excited. Okay, here, I'll do it right." That is, I think, the only solution, right? I mean, is for everybody to kind
Mhm.
of have a grip on what is proper in this game. And maybe there are some people who won't like it no matter what. They're stuck. They're not going to change, and they're not the right person to be playing this particular game. So that's cool,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So, but I am saying though that the what superficially looks like the stubborn, old school, no, none of this newfangled shit in your little points, Jeff, kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
making it real stubborn and hidebound on their part may not be the right way to go. If he thought that his character's backstory was inviolate, then he's not wrong to think that. That is a way to look at things.
Right.
And he may have good reasons for, hanging on to that very protectively historically.
Hmm.
So therefore it's all a matter of what is, the right way. I was going also to say with the I think what it is, that issue of the known. I mean, look at it this way. You say you framed the scenes where the characters are all chained up. So have I. Okay. But I think that it is legitimate when you say by whom, and everybody's like, yep, that's the guy who would do it. I get it. To make it completely mysterious may be possible, but if you're looking for sort of the but that is for a group in which things are very, very episodic, right? Very,
Hmm.
never mind what happened in between, we're starting here.
Hmm.
But if things are a little more continuous, then when you put somebody in a drastic startup, having it be sort of understandable in terms of all the dynamics so far is a good thing.
Right.
So I guess again, I'm just trying to get you to think about what are some of the criteria or algorithms you go through when you make these decisions, because it could be pretty complex.
Yeah. And formulating that, I feel like that's I'm gonna have to like think about that, how to get across when I'm, in a text or whatever, say, here are the standards you need to follow. Because I
There,
know, like,
the trouble is, of course, is that if you keep second guessing yourself about that and trying to nail down every last little point, you're just going to create this legal tome, of the
you're right.
unsayable phrases, section 12 subchapter A stroke 7, and that's not going to help anything. So
Right.
if we instead maybe stick with kind of my construction, where the again, we're talking about the play of the moment, the thing we're actually playing at the moment. It's got a backstory of some kind. The characters also, they're in the situation, so their own little stories or their own personal histories all are part of the big backstory. Everybody has something behind them. So the question then becomes, if we're talking about the players setting up that situation and they have been told to work only with what's known, and if they're going to be touching someone else's stuff that other person up until now has been pretty much the sole arbiter for, they should ask. They should ask. I mean, it's kind of the that way those points allow contributions and new creative content, which is really what they're for, right? New creative content and context for what's going to happen. But there are things that, instead of just like, I have the point, I get to say, it means that you can ask, and if they say no, well, do something else for God's sake. Don't, don't tell that guy that a witch turned his head into a donkey's head before play just began. Before don't do that. The guy should be able to say, no, I don't want to have a donkey's head, and have that be that. And so it seems to me as though we have to, and I know this is going to sound weird, we actually have to be talking about authorities, but not about power. It's really not about power to override the structure of information and talking that we have in place. It's authority over material where you, how am I going to put it? Where there are certain things that you still don't get to mess with, or you can only mess with permission. Um, and I think that may or may not be part of your own working arsenal of GMing stuff. I mean, yes, you can come up with cool shit to start with, but sometimes don't you say, how, I'd like to do this. That's okay with you, right, Bob? I mean, I don't know if you
Right.
do that or not, but I know that, and when I do that, I tend to forget it. I'm thinking back to when I used to play tons and tons and tons of champions, and the situational setup for a night session, we were talking about modern characters with superpowers who basically can go around and do whatever they want when I, the GM, am not looking. So if I say, okay, I want to start, at your apartment early in the morning, that okay, Bob? And Bob might say, yes, that sounds great. Or Bob might say, I mean, we haven't even started playing yet, right? He's saying, I really want to, I mean, I want to be at the nightclub. Can we be at the nightclub? Right? It's important to me. I want to be at the nightclub. And so, but the point is, we haven't really started playing yet. And I realized in retrospect that a lot of my scene framing in Champions, when there's a gap, was me asking. Even if I had a good idea, I would often ask because their sense of I play my superhero walking and talking and going where they will, you got to catch me in a death trap before you can take that away from me, right? I mean, they aren't. If you say, haha, frame your characters into scenes, then they're paralyzed. It's like, dude, I came to play. That's your job. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there could be an aspect of it which is just if it has to do with another player character, and their identity, basically, ask. It's if you do that already, well, you do it already. I mean, it's not. I mean, to some extent, people like to have their characters thrown into uncontrolled and often even very disadvantageous situations. I mean, to the point where you might say, okay, we're starting and you've got an arrow through your shoulder. Here, this much damage. I mean, there are plenty of players who are okay with that, surprisingly enough, right? They're always supposed to be so protective over damage to their characters. But they
Right.
love people are masochists. They love having their characters damaged, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
a lot of the time. And so you can say, hey, we're starting off, we're on this battlefield, you got an arrow through your shoulder. And if that doesn't change something fundamental about this character, like their identity or something, or parts of their backstory they feel strongly about, they're all for it. They might be all for it. They're like, cool, yes, arrow through my shoulder. That's awesome. Here, how many hit points? Right? I'll mark them off for you. Here we go. Right? So it's kind of it's it is almost more a matter of how do we get this established so that your standards aren't being picked on